The first time I cast a circle, I felt it. That unmistakable shift when ordinary space becomes something else. Common sense tells me I'm just standing in the same room, but I can feel that moment when the air changes, when reality shifts. I wonder what's really happening in that moment.
Welcome to Synapse and Shadow. I'm Tegan Lleuad, and today we're exploring one of the most spellbinding intersections of science and magic. What actually happens when we create sacred space? You know the feeling when you've cast your circles, set your wards, or entered a sacred site, and something viscerally changes in the air around you. Your skin might tingle, your breath might deepen, and the quality of the silence itself seems to shift. Traditional science would tell us that nothing has changed. We're still just standing in the same room, breathing the same air. But what if there's more to it? I believe Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, gave us the framework to understand what's really happening in these transformative moments. In 1931, Planck made a radical declaration that shook the foundations of physics when he said, quote, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. Matter is derivative from consciousness," unquote. Today, we're going to explore what this means for our understanding of ritual space and how modern science might explain that profound shift we feel when we step between worlds. In our previous episodes, we explored how consciousness shapes reality at the quantum level and how working with our shadow aspects mirrors quantum principles of observation and transformation. Today, we're taking that understanding further into the sacred spaces we create through ritual. This isn't just about magic. The creation of sacred space is a universal human experience that crosses cultures, traditions, and time. From ancient stone circles to modern meditation rooms, humans have always created specific spaces for transformation. But why do these spaces work? What's actually happening when we draw that circle or cross that threshold? To answer these questions, we need to look through multiple lenses. Neuroscience shows us that structured ritual patterns physically reshape our neural pathways. When we cast a circle or create sacred space, we're not just performing symbolic acts, we're activating specific brain states that facilitate transformation. Quantum physics, particularly through Planck's pioneering work, suggests that consciousness and energy are quantized. They exist in discrete, measurable units. When we create ritual space, we might actually be establishing what quantum physicists would call a coherent field, a space where energy and intention align in measurable ways. Psychology tells us these spaces activate deep layers of consciousness, creating what Carl Jung called a temenos, a protected space where transformation becomes possible. And magical practitioners? Archaeological evidence shows that humans have been creating ritual spaces for at least 40,000 years, developing increasingly sophisticated techniques for establishing and working with these transformative environments. From the cave temples of Paleolithic Europe to modern ceremonial spaces, we've been refining these practices across generations. Today, we're going to explore what happens when these perspectives converge. We'll look at the measurable changes that occur in ritual space, from brainwave patterns to electromagnetic fields. We'll explain how quantum field theory might explain the energetic boundaries we create, and we'll explore practical techniques for working with these principles in your own practice. Whether you're a scientist curious about the mechanics of ritual, a practitioner seeking deeper understanding of your craft, or simply someone who's ever felt that profound shift when entering a sacred space, this exploration is for you. So ground yourself, set your intentions, and join me as we step into the quantum nature of sacred space. Let's start with something measurable. What actually happens in your body when you enter or create sacred space? Not what you believe happens or what tradition tells us is supposed to happen, but what can we actually observe and measure? When practitioners report feeling different in ritual space, they're not imagining it. Modern medical equipment can detect distinct physiological changes that occur during ritual work. When practitioners report feeling different in ritual space, it's not a figment of their imagination. Your heart rate variability, which is the variation in time between heartbeats, typically becomes more coherent, meaning it falls into a more organized rhythmic pattern. This is actually measurable evidence of your body shifting into a calmer, more balanced state. Your skin conductance changes too. Basically, that's the electrical properties of your skin, and they shift in ways that tell us your nervous system is moving away from its fight or flight state into what we call the parasympathetic response, often known as the rest and digest mode. That's the opposite of fight or flight. Even your breathing pattern naturally alters, usually becoming slower and more rhythmic. But the most fascinating changes happen in your brain. Using EEG monitoring, researchers have documented clear shifts in brainwave patterns during ritual work. When you first begin setting sacred space, whether that's casting the circle, lying out your ritual tools, or simply entering an established sacred site, your brain typically transitions from beta waves associated with normal waking consciousness to alpha waves, indicating a more relaxed, receptive state. As you move deeper into ritual space and practice, many practitioners show increased theta wave activity, the same pattern we see in deep meditation. And here's where it gets really magical. During intensely profound moments in rituals, some practitioners exhibit brief surges of gamma brainwaves, the highest frequency brainwave pattern measurable. Gamma waves are linked to heightened states of awareness, deep insight, and peak experiences. Understanding these patterns gives us practical tools for enhancing our ritual work. For instance, when we talk about grounding and centering before casting a circle, we're actually describing a specific neurological process. That grounding practice helps activate your vagus nerve, the main component of your parasympathetic nervous system. It begins in your brainstem and flows down the side of your neck and then branches out to most of the major organs inside your body. Stimulating this nerve creates these physiological conditions most conducive to ritual work. Think of it like tuning an instrument. Just as a musician needs their instrument in tune before playing, these preliminary practices literally tune your nervous system to the optimal state for ritual work. This is why rushing into ritual space often feels off. You haven't given your nervous system time to shift into the right state. The implications for practical ritual work are profound. By understanding these neurological processes, we can design our ritual practices to work with our brain's natural patterns rather than against them. Here's how this might apply to a basic circle casting. Traditional practices often start with a period of grounding and centering, followed by defining the space, raising energy, and setting intentions. From a neuroscientific perspective, this sequence makes perfect sense. The initial grounding period gives your nervous system time to shift from everyday consciousness into a more receptive state. Those deep breaths and moments of stillness, they're activating your parasympathetic nervous system, preparing your brain for the deeper work to come. When you begin to define your space, whether walking the circle, placing markers, or visualizing boundaries, you're engaging multiple sensory networks in your brain. This multisensory involvement helps create stronger neural pathways associated with the ritual space, making it easier to achieve similar states in future workings. And here's where quantum physics enters the picture. As your brain shifts into these more coherent states, something interesting happens to the electromagnetic field around your body. Using sensitive magnetometers, researchers have detected measurable changes in these personal fields during meditative and ritual states. When we cast a circle, we might actually be creating a coherent domain, a space where these electromagnetic fields organize into more ordered patterns. Let's explore this with a simple demonstration you can try at home. Don't worry if you're driving or otherwise occupied. Just listen now and try it later when you're in a safe, quiet space. First, we'll measure your baseline state. If you have tools like a heart rate monitor or an EMF meter, great. If not, you can simply note your subjective experience. Pay attention to your breathing rate, your heart rate. Your phone probably already has apps on it that will measure these things. Pay attention to the temperature of your hands, the quality of the air around you, and your general state of awareness. Now we'll create sacred space using a simplified protocol that combines traditional practice with our understanding of neuroscience. Here's the protocol. First, stand or sit comfortably. Take 3 deep, slow breaths, but not just any breaths. We're going to use what scientists call respiratory sinus arrhythmia breathing and what mystics call pranayama. Specifically, we'll use a pattern similar to Vishamvriti pranayama. Inhale for a count of 4, hold briefly, then exhale for a count of 6. This ancient breathing technique has a direct effect on your nervous system. Modern science has shown it helps trigger that parasympathetic response we talked about. In fact, this is another perfect example of how ancient magical knowledge often predates scientific understanding. Long before we could measure vagal tone or heart rate variability, the Hindu yogis in India knew this breathing pattern would help shift consciousness into an optimal state for ritual work. Anyway, after your 3 deep breaths, bring your attention to the space around you. Traditionally, we might call this casting your senses. From a neuroscience perspective, you're actually activating your brain's spatial awareness networks and preparing them for the work of defining sacred space. Now, using whatever method feels natural to you, visualization, physical movement, or both, begin to define your circle. If you're doing this physically, move clockwise, taking deliberate steps. If you're working purely with visualization, see the boundary forming with each breath. As you define this space, pay attention to the sensations in your body. You might notice a change in air pressure or temperature, tingling in your hands or along your spine, a shift in how sound seems to reach you, changes in your peripheral vision, or a distinct feeling of thickness in the air. These aren't just subjective experiences. They're your body's response to the coherent field you're creating. The organized movement, focused intention, and rhythmic breathing combine to shift both your nervous system and the electromagnetic field around you into a more ordered state. Once you've completed your circle, pause and take new measurements. Notice, has your breathing changed? What's happened to your heart rate? How does the temperature of your hands compare to before? What's different about the quality of the air? Has your awareness shifted? What you're experiencing is the intersection of neuroscience and quantum field effects. Your nervous system has shifted into a more coherent state, and this internal coherence is reflected in the electromagnetic field around your body. When we work in groups, these individual fields can become entrained, synchronized in a way that amplifies the effect. The Heart Math Institute has done fascinating research on this phenomena, documenting how people working or meditating together often show synchronized heart rhythms and coherent electromagnetic fields. Recall the last time you participated in group ritual work. You might have noticed how the energy feels different, often stronger or more focused than when you were alone. This isn't just suggestion or group psychology at work. When multiple practitioners in a coherent state work together, their individual EM fields can interact and synchronize, creating a collective coherent domain. This is particularly noticeable in traditional circle casting when each person takes on a specific role or direction. As the group moves through the ritual together, their breathing often naturally synchronizes, their heart rates may align, and their individual energy fields begin to entrain, creating a stronger, more stable sacred space than any one person could maintain alone. We can actually measure this effect using sensitive equipment. When groups work together in ritual space, researchers have documented increased field strength at the periphery of the circle, more stable electromagnetic readings within the space, synchronized heart rate variability among participants, and coherent brainwave patterns across the group. But perhaps more interesting is what happens when new people enter an established group field. Even if they're not familiar with their practice, their nervous systems often begin to synchronize with the group's coherent field. This is why experienced practitioners often say that group ritual has a carrying effect. helping less experienced members achieve deeper states more easily. Understanding these principles of group coherence gives us practical tools for enhancing our ritual work together. For instance, starting with synchronized breathing, maintaining consistent movement patterns, and having more experienced practitioners spaced evenly around the circle can help establish and maintain this field coherence more effectively. But whether working in a group or alone, what we're really doing is creating what Max Planck would call a quantized field, a space where energy exists in discrete, measurable states rather than random fluctuations. This brings us to one of the most interesting aspects of ritual space, how these coherent fields interact with consciousness itself. When Planck declared that consciousness was fundamental to reality, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. His work with quantum mechanics led him to understand that the observer, consciousness itself, plays a crucial role in how energy behaves. In ritual space, we're both the observers and the creators of these coherent fields. This dual role of observer and creator is crucial to understanding how ritual space actually works. Think back to what happens when you cast a circle. You're simultaneously creating the space and observing its creation. Like the famous double slit experiment, your consciousness, your intent, and attention fundamentally affects the outcome. When Planck said, "I regard matter as derivative from consciousness," he was suggesting something paradigm shifting, that consciousness isn't just awareness of reality, but fundamental to its formation. In ritual space, we're working directly with this principle. Every gesture, every word, every intention is both an act of creation and an act of observation, and both aspects matter. This explains something that experienced practitioners often notice. Ritual space feels different when you're fully present and engaged versus when you're distracted or just going through the motions. From a quantum perspective, this makes perfect sense. Your state of consciousness, your quality of observation and intention directly affects the coherence of the field you're creating. Let's break this down practically. When you cast a circle with full awareness, you're consciously defining the boundary between ordinary and sacred space. You're maintaining coherent focus that helps stabilize the quantum field. You're observing and therefore collapsing quantum possibilities into a specific state. And you're creating a domain of coherence where consciousness and energy align in specific ways. This is why traditional teachings put so much emphasis on maintaining focus during ritual. It's not just about avoiding mistakes in the ceremony. Your focused consciousness is actually part of what maintains the integrity of the sacred space itself. And here's where it gets even better. Ritual practice actually changes your brain over time. This is where neuroplasticity comes into play. That's your brain's ability to form new neural pathways. When you regularly create sacred space, you're not just performing a ceremony. You're literally rewiring your neural circuits. This is known as state-dependent learning. Each time you enter ritual space, your brain creates stronger pathways associated with that state of consciousness. This is why experienced practitioners can often shift into ritual consciousness more easily than beginners. They've already built neural networks dedicated to this transition. Over time, these changes become more permanent. Long-term practice effects show up as easier access to ritual consciousness, more stable altered states, stronger physiological responses to ritual cues, and enhanced ability to maintain focused awareness. These neurological changes aren't just theoretical, they're measurable, documentable phenomena. And this brings us to an exciting development in modern magical practice, our ability to track and measure these shifts as they occur. While our ancestors relied solely on subjective experience, we now have tools that can help us understand and validate what practitioners have always felt. Understanding these principles of consciousness and quantum coherence gives us practical tools for enhancing our ritual work. Let's examine how we can actually measure and document these changes in sacred space. Modern technology offers us ways to observe what we have always felt. You don't need expensive laboratory equipment. Even basic tools can give us valuable data. An EMF meter can detect changes in electromagnetic fields before, during, and after circle casting. Simple temperature sensors often show distinct patterns within sacred space. Voice recorders can pick up changes in acoustic properties. Heart rate monitors can track physiological shifts. Even smartphone apps can measure environmental changes. The key is consistent documentation. In your Field Notes journal, you'll find templates for recording environmental conditions, physical responses, energy signatures, observable changes, and time and duration data. We'll try a simple demonstration of measurement protocol, but first let's talk about safety. Anytime we work with altered states of consciousness, it's important to have proper grounding protocols in place. Keep a grounding stone nearby if you use one. Have water and a small snack on hand. Most importantly, know that you can pause or stop at any time if you feel overwhelmed. This is exploration, not a test. Take notes about what you experience, but don't get so caught up in measurements that you lose touch with your own internal guidance system. Now, before creating sacred space, take baseline readings. Record the temperature, any EMF readings, and your heart rate if you're using a monitor. Notice the time and environmental conditions. As you create your space, have your tools ready, but don't focus on them. Maintain ritual consciousness first, letting someone else record measurements if you're working in a group. After completion, take another full set of readings. The patterns that emerge over time often surprise even experienced practitioners. Many find consistent temperature variations in specific parts of their circle, reliable EMF spikes during certain phases of ritual, or repeatable patterns in physiological responses. Now let's pause for a moment and gather what we've learned. We've seen how creating sacred space triggers measurable changes in our bodies, from heart rhythms to brainwave patterns. We've explored how regular practice literally reshapes our neural pathways, making these states more accessible over time. And we've discovered that these changes aren't just personal, they create measurable effects in the physical world around us. This brings us to our next exploration, how these measurable changes relate to frequency, resonance, and quantum coherence. When Max Planck discovered that energy exists in discrete units, he gave us a framework for understanding something witches have always known, that different forms of ritual work operate at different frequencies. When Max Planck first proposed that energy exists in discrete units, what we now call quanta, he revolutionized our understanding of how the universe works. But he might not have realized he was also providing a scientific framework for understanding sacred space. Consider what happens during ritual work. Different tools, different sounds, different movements all seem to carry their own unique energetic signatures. A bell rung in sacred space feels different than the same bell rung in your kitchen. A crystal used in meditation holds a different quality than the same crystal sitting on your shelf. Planck's work helps us understand why. According to quantum field theory, everything, including consciousness, exists as vibrating fields of energy. These fields can either be coherent, like a laser beam where all the waves are synchronized, or incoherent, like the scattered light from a regular incandescent bulb. When we create sacred space, we're essentially creating a coherent domain, an area where these various energy fields begin to synchronize and work together. Again, this isn't theoretical. The HeartMath Institute's research shows that meditation and focused intention can create measurable changes in the coherence of our heart's electromagnetic field. When we cast a circle or create sacred space, we might be doing something similar on a much larger scale. Let's break down what's actually happening in terms of field theory. When you cast a circle, you're creating what physicists call a boundary condition, a defined area where energy behaves differently than it does in the surrounding space. Just as a quantum well traps particles in specific energy states, a properly cast circle creates a container where energy can become more organized and more coherent. The tools we use in ritual work make more sense through this lens, too. Take sound tools, bells, singing bowls, drums. They aren't just making pretty noise. They're creating specific frequency patterns that help establish and maintain field coherence. It's similar to how scientists use specific frequencies to manipulate quantum states in the laboratory. This explains something many witches have noticed: why certain tools work better for certain types of ritual. Each form of magical work has its optimal frequency range, its own quantum resonance, if you will. A drum might be perfect for grounding work because its low frequencies help entrain our brain waves to earth-resonant frequencies. A high-pitched bell might work better for spirit communication because its frequencies align better with higher energy states. But this is where it gets even more compelling. According to quantum field theory, these fields aren't separate. They're all interacting, influencing each other. Your personal energy field, the coherent space you've created, the tools you're using, they're all part of what physicists call a coupled system. Change one part and you affect the whole. This is why experienced practitioners often say that sacred space feels alive, because it is. It's a dynamic, interactive field of quantum possibilities, constantly responding to and being shaped by our consciousness. This understanding gives us practical insights on how to work more effectively with sacred space. For instance, when you're having trouble maintaining a circle, you might be experiencing decoherence, when quantum states break down due to interference from the environment. This is why traditional practices emphasize the importance of proper grounding and shielding. Again, think of it like tuning an instrument, but instead of adjusting strings, you're tuning fields of energy. When you set up sacred space, you're creating a coherent boundary that helps minimize external interference. You're establishing specific frequency patterns that support your intended work. You're aligning your personal field with the larger field you're creating. And you're setting up conditions where specific quantum states can be maintained. Here's a practical example. Have you ever noticed how some ritual spaces feel better at certain times of day or during certain moon phases? From a quantum perspective, this makes perfect sense. The Earth's electromagnetic field, which varies with time of day and lunar cycles, is part of your coupled system. When that ambient field frequencies align with your ritual intentions, the work becomes easier. You're getting what physicists call constructive interference. This is also why certain crystals, herbs, or other magical tools seem to work better in combination than alone. In quantum terms, they're creating what's called emergent phenomena, effects that arise from the interaction of multiple quantum fields that wouldn't be possible from any single component. Understanding these principles gives us new ways to work with traditional practices. This brings us to perhaps the most fascinating aspect of quantum field theory and sacred space, how these coherent fields interact with consciousness itself. If Planck was right and consciousness is indeed fundamental to reality, then our focused awareness in ritual space isn't just observing these quantum effects, it's integral to creating them. Let's explore what happens in that liminal space between ordinary and sacred consciousness. This is where psychology, quantum physics, and magical practice converge in particularly interesting ways. When you first enter ritual space, whether that's a caste circle, a sacred site, or a dedicated meditation area, you're creating what psychologists call a state shift. But from a quantum perspective, something even more interesting is happening. You're entering what physicists call a superposition state, a condition where multiple possibilities exist simultaneously. Remember that moment just before you begin your ritual work. In that space, all possibilities are still fluid, still undefined. Like Schrödinger's famous cat, the final state hasn't yet been determined. Your consciousness, your focused intention and attention helps collapse these quantum possibilities into specific outcomes. This observer effect in ritual space is more profound than we might think. Just as quantum particles behave differently when they're being measured, ritual space responds to conscious observation. The difference is, in ritual space, we're not just passive observers, we're active participants in this quantum dance. Consider what happens during a working. When you raise energy in a circle, you're not just imagining or visualizing, you're actively participating in a quantum field interaction. Your consciousness, through focused intention, helps maintain quantum coherence, a state where multiple elements work together in harmony rather than chaos. This explains why maintaining focused awareness is so crucial in ritual work. It's not just about remembering the words or gestures. Your conscious attention is actually helping to maintain the coherent field you've created. When your attention wavers, the field begins to lose coherence, just as quantum states decohere when they're not properly maintained. When Max Planck declared consciousness to be fundamental to reality, he wasn't just making a philosophical statement. He was describing something that quantum physics continues to validate. Consciousness and reality are inextricably linked. In sacred space, we work with this principle directly. We're working at the intersection of conscious intention and quantum possibility. Every ritual, every working, every moment of focused intention is an example of what quantum physicists call collapsing the wave function, bringing one possibility out of many into manifestation. But what makes ritual space unique is we're doing this deliberately, consciously. Unlike the random quantum fluctuations scientists observe in laboratories, ritual work creates what we might call directed quantum effects. Through specific techniques developed over generations, we've learned to work with these quantum possibilities in structured ways. Reflect on what happens when you set an intention in sacred space. You're not just making a wish or stating a goal. You're actually creating a preferred quantum state. You're increasing the possibility of certain outcomes while decreasing others. This is why clarity of intention is so crucial in magical work. Fuzzy intentions create fuzzy quantum states. This is also why sacred space feels different from ordinary space. In quantum terms, you've created a coherent domain, an area where quantum possibilities are more organized, more aligned. It's similar to how a laser organizes light waves into coherent beams, except in ritual space, rather than photons, we're working with fields of consciousness and intention. The fascinating thing is that these effects aren't limited to the moment of ritual. Just as quantum entanglement can maintain connections across space and time, the effects of ritual work can continue to influence reality long after the circle is closed. These lasting effects give us insight into how ritual work continues to influence reality even after we've closed our circles and returned to ordinary space. Think of it like creating a quantum ripple in the fabric of reality. The initial action happens in sacred space, but the effects propagate outward through both space and time. This explains something practitioners have long observed. Why some spells seem to take root and develop over time, while others manifest quickly and then fade. From a quantum perspective, we're seeing different types of field interactions. Some workings create stable quantum states, effects that maintain their coherence over time. Others produce more temporary quantum fluctuations. Traditional magical practices reflect this understanding, even if they use different terminology. When we're taught to ground our workings or anchor our intentions, we're essentially learning to create these stable quantum states. The threefold law, the concept that magical effects return amplified, might be describing quantum resonance patterns rippling through time. This is also why magical workings often seem to influence apparently unrelated areas of our lives. In quantum field theory, we know that entangled particles remain connected regardless of distance. Similarly, the intentions we set in sacred space can create patterns of influence that extend far beyond their original focus. These quantum entanglements in magical workings have profound implications for ethical practice. Just as physicists have discovered that measuring one entangled particle instantly affects its partner, regardless of distance, our magical intentions create ripples that affect not just our target, but entire webs of connected relationships and circumstances. Examine what this means in practical terms. When you cast a spell to influence another person, even with the best intentions, you're not just affecting that individual. You're interacting with a complex quantum web that includes their relationships, their circumstances, and their own free will. Like a stone dropped in a pond, the ripples spread in ways we can't fully predict or control. And this is why traditional magical teachings emphasize personal responsibility and the importance of non-harm. It's not just about moral philosophy. It's about understanding the fundamental interconnectedness of reality at the quantum level. When we send out an intention to harm, we're essentially polluting our own quantum field, creating patterns of discord that will inevitably reflect back to us. This understanding leads us to more effective magical practice. Instead of trying to force change upon others, we can work with our own quantum field, setting intentions that respect the autonomy and interconnectedness of all beings. This creates more stable, harmonious patterns that are more likely to manifest in beneficial ways. Understanding these quantum connections also helps explain something else practitioners have long observed: why ritual work tends to be most effective when focused on our own sphere of influence. When we work with our own quantum field, we're dealing with states we have direct conscious access to and control over. This brings us to another fascinating aspect of consciousness in sacred space: how we can actually learn to sense and work with these quantum states directly. While scientists need sophisticated equipment to measure quantum effects in the laboratory, practitioners have developed techniques to perceive and influence these states through trained awareness. Let's explore some of the practical methods for developing this quantum sensitivity in your own practice. These techniques combine traditional magical training with our understanding of quantum field interactions. Just as scientists calibrate their instruments before measuring quantum states, we need to develop and refine our own sensing abilities. Here are some practical techniques that combine traditional magical training with quantum field awareness. First, start with a controlled environment. Find a space where you regularly practice. Before any formal ritual work, spend time there simply observing. Notice the subtle qualities of the space: temperature variations, air movement, electromagnetic sensations. These baseline observations give you a reference point for recognizing quantum field changes later. Next, practice what I call quantum sensing. Start by casting a circle, but instead of rushing through the process, pause after each quarter is defined. Notice how the quality of the space changes as you build the boundary conditions. You might feel shifts in air pressure or density, changes in the quality of silence, variations in electromagnetic sensation, alterations in spatial awareness. Pay particular attention to the moments just before and just after you complete the circle, that transition point where ordinary space becomes sacred space. It's like observing a quantum state change in real time. Make notes in your field notes journal about these sensations. Patterns will emerge over time. Advanced practitioners can take this further by learning to recognize different types of quantum coherence. Just as scientists can identify different quantum states through measurement, you can learn to distinguish different qualities of sacred space. To work with these advanced techniques, think of yourself as both the observer and the measuring instrument. Like a quantum physicist's sensitive detectors, your trained awareness can distinguish subtle variations in field coherence. Here's what to practice. First, Learn to recognize the different frequencies of sacred space. Protection work tends to create dense, stable field patterns, like a quantum well with clearly defined boundaries. Divination work often generates more fluid, dynamic states. Healing work typically produces highly coherent, resonant fields. Try this. Cast your circle 3 times on different days, each time with a different intention. Once for protection, once for divination, once for healing. In your field notes journal, record the subtle differences in how each space feels. Notice the texture of the energy, how the boundary feels, the quality of the silence, and your own physical and energetic responses. Over time, you'll develop calibrated sensitivity, the ability to consciously recognize and work with different quantum states in sacred space. But perhaps the most advanced technique is learning to maintain multiple quantum states simultaneously, like a physicist working with entangled particles. But let me emphasize something important. Just as a quantum physicist spends years learning to work with sensitive equipment, developing these awareness skills takes time. If you're new to magical practice, focus on mastering the basics first. There's no rush, and everyone's journey is unique. Bear in mind, even the most experienced quantum physicist had to start with basic principles. The same is true in magical practice. Those subtle sensations you're just beginning to notice, they're the foundation for everything that follows. Now, for those ready to explore these advanced states, here's what working with multiple quantum fields looks like. Imagine maintaining your protective circle while simultaneously opening a scrying space. You're essentially working with 2 different quantum states at once, like a physicist maintaining 2 different coherent fields in the laboratory. One field remains stable and protective, while the other becomes fluid and receptive. This takes considerable practice and energy. You might begin by first mastering each state individually, learning to recognize their distinct signatures, gradually working with both for brief periods, and slowly building your stamina and sensitivity. Don't be discouraged if this seems challenging at first. Every experienced witch started exactly where you are now. Let's explore how our brains process and integrate these quantum experiences. While we're working with subtle energies and quantum fields, our physical brains are also playing a crucial role in how we perceive and interact with sacred space. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. When we work in sacred space, multiple cognitive systems activate simultaneously. Our spatial awareness networks map the sacred circle. Our pattern recognition systems identify meaningful symbols and correspondences. Our memory systems connect current experiences with past workings. Our emotional centers process the energetic shifts we experience. This explains why experienced practitioners often develop what we might call magical intuition. Their brains have literally built neural networks dedicated to recognizing and processing subtle energetic patterns. It's similar to how a trained musician can hear subtle variations in tone that others might miss. But this cognitive processing goes beyond simple pattern recognition. When we work in sacred space, we're also engaging the state-dependent memory, experiences, insights, and abilities that are hard to access in ordinary consciousness become available in ritual space because we've created specific neural pathways associated with that state. This leads us to something else remarkable. how these experiences actually transform us. This transformation happens on multiple levels simultaneously. First, there's the immediate neurological change, your brain literally rewiring itself with each ritual experience. Then there's the quantum level, where your personal energy field becomes more coherent, more organized. And finally, there's the psychological integration of these experiences. Think of it like learning to play an instrument. At first, you have to consciously think about every movement. But with practice, the neural pathways become established, the movements become fluid, and eventually you can express yourself through the instrument without conscious thought. The same thing happens with magical practice. Each time you enter sacred space, you're strengthening your neural pathways related to subtle energy perception. You're building more coherent personal energy patterns. You're developing deeper integration between ordinary and magical consciousness. You're creating stronger connections between your conscious and unconscious mind. This is why traditional teachings emphasize regular practice. It's not just about learning techniques. It's about fundamentally transforming how your brain and energy field process reality. Over time, the boundary between ordinary and magical consciousness becomes more permeable. You might notice increased sensitivity to subtle energies in everyday life, more frequent synchronicities, enhanced intuitive abilities, greater ease in shifting between states of consciousness. But perhaps, most importantly, this transformation changes how you interact with reality itself. This transformative process brings us to an interesting intersection, where ancient magical technology meets modern scientific understanding. The tools and techniques magic practitioners have used for generations take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of quantum field theory and neuroscience. The tools we use in magical practice aren't just symbolic. They're sophisticated instruments for working with quantum fields and states of consciousness. Whether it's a black mirror for scrying, a crystal for energy work, or a wand for directing intention, each tool serves as what we might call a quantum field manipulator. But now we can actually measure many of the effects these traditional tools create. Modern technology gives us new ways to understand and validate what we witches know through direct experience. We can observe how these ancient and modern technologies complement each other. Consider the tools that practitioners have relied on for generations. A ritual blade or a wand isn't just a pointer. It's a tool for directing coherent energy fields, much like how scientists use waveguides to direct electromagnetic radiation. When you trace a circle with your blade, you're actually creating a boundary condition, a defined edge where quantum states shift from one configuration to another. Crystals, those staples of magical practice, act as field resonators. Their geometric molecular structures create consistent vibrational patterns that can help stabilize and organize surrounding energy fields. This is why different crystals seem better suited for different types of work. They're literally resonating at different frequencies. Even the incense serves a quantum function. Beyond its psychological effects, the particles in smoke create condensation nuclei, points where energy can gather and form patterns. This is why smoke is often the first place practitioners notice subtle energy manifestations. But today we compare these traditional tools with modern measurement devices. EMF meters can track field changes during ritual work. Infrared cameras can detect temperature variations in sacred space. Sensitive microphones can pick up acoustic changes. The heart rate monitor in our smartwatches or phones can document physiological responses. The synthesis of old and new creates what we could call a quantum feedback loop. The traditional tools help us create and maintain specific energetic states, while modern instruments help us refine and validate our techniques. For example, here's an example of circle casting with both types of technology. Your ritual blade creates the energetic boundary. An EMF meter confirms field strength changes. Traditional crystals at the quarters stabilize the space. Temperature sensors track environmental shifts. Incense helps you visualize energy flow. A heart rate monitor documents your physiological response to the working. By documenting these effects systematically in your field notes journal, patterns emerge that can help you understand which techniques are most effective for different types of work. You might discover certain crystals create stronger field measurements. Specific times of day show more coherent readings. Some ritual tools produce more consistent results. Particular techniques generate stronger physiological responses. But don't forget, the instruments are tools for learning, not the goal itself. They should enhance your practice, not distract from it. Think of them like training wheels on a bicycle. Here are some practical guidelines for working with both traditional and modern tools. First, establish your practice with traditional tools before adding modern measurements. Just as a musician must learn to feel the music before using a tuner, you need to develop your own sensing abilities before bringing in external validation. When you're ready to add modern technology, set up your instruments before ritual work. Have a dedicated person handle measurements if working in a group. Keep recording devices on silent mode. Position tools where they won't distract you from your practice. Remember that some workings might interfere with electronic equipment. Trust your own senses when instrument readings seem counterintuitive. And most importantly, don't let the desire for measurement overshadow the actual magical work. These tools are meant to enhance our understanding, not replace direct experience. This brings us to perhaps the most important question. How do we bring all of this together into a coherent, practical system? How do we integrate these scientific insights with traditional magical practice in a way that enhances both? The key to integration is balance, honoring both the ancient wisdom and modern understanding while remaining grounded in practical application. So how could we build a practice that bridges these worlds? First, we'd establish our foundation. Create a dedicated space for practice. Set up basic measurement protocols. Keep your field notes journal handy. Start with simple rituals and build complexity gradually. Document everything, both the measurable and the subjective. Safety protocols are crucial. Always ground and center before beginning. Set clear boundaries for your exploration. Know the signs of energetic overwhelm. Have backup practices for when technology fails, because it always will. Keep emergency grounding tools nearby. Know when to take breaks. Watch for these signs that you need to pause. Dizziness or disorientation, unusual emotional fluctuations, electronic equipment behaving erratically, persistent physical symptoms, loss of time awareness, difficulty returning to ordinary consciousness. Keep in mind the work is a journey, not a destination. Success markers will vary for each person, but generally include increased sensitivity to subtle energies, more consistent measurement results, deeper understanding of your own patterns, greater control over state shifts, enhanced ability to maintain coherent fields, and clearer communication between your scientific and magical awareness. Maintaining an integrated practice over time requires both structure and flexibility. It's kind of like tending a garden. You need regular habits, but must also adapt to changing conditions. For long-term success, establish regular practice times that align with your natural rhythms. A systematic approach to documentation, clear goals for both magical and scientific progress, a network of supportive practitioners, regular reviews of your field notes, time for both structured work and pure exploration. Pay attention to how your practice evolves. Which techniques consistently produce results? What times and conditions work best for you? How does your sensitivity develop over time? Where do you need more study or practice? What patterns emerge in your documentation? How does your understanding deepen with experience? This isn't just about personal development. You're contributing to a broader understanding of how consciousness interacts with reality. Every careful observation, every documented effect, every pattern you discover adds to our collective knowledge. As we conclude this exploration of sacred space and quantum reality, realize that you're walking a path that bridges ancient wisdom and modern understanding. Each time you step into sacred space, you're both a practitioner of ancient arts and an explorer of quantum mysteries. As we close this exploration of Planck's sacred circle, we've discovered how quantum physics, neuroscience, and magical practice converge to help us understand what happens when we create sacred space. From the measurable changes in our bodies to the quantum fields we generate, from ancient tools to modern technology, we're beginning to bridge the gap between scientific understanding and magical experience. Remember to download your field notes journal pages from podcast.teganlleauad.com. This episode's worksheets include templates for quantum field measurement protocols, sacred space documentation sheets, tool calibration guides, safety checklists, integration tracking forms, and anything else I might think of. This has been Synapse and Shadow. I'm Tegan Lleuad, reminding you that science and magic aren't opposing forces. They're different languages speaking the same reality. Next time on Synapse and Shadow, we'll explore energy, intuition, and developing psychic awareness. We'll examine how science is beginning to understand these subtle perceptions and discover practical techniques for enhancing your natural intuitive abilities. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep dancing between worlds.